All right. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Eddie Live podcast, episode number 261. I'm here with Mike Chimoy. How you doing, brother?
Good to see you.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Very inspiring documentary. I have a lot of questions, and now that we're live, I can ask him, right? Of course, the first question would be, well, before you tell me about yourself, the documentary about CK Young and Rafer Johnson. Why was this such an important thing for you to bring to light now in 2024?
It's a really compelling story. The story of how we got the story goes back a long time. It goes back to when my co-creator John Critch met CK Young, tracked him down in 2006. John was a reporter for the Asian Wall Street Journal. He was doing a feature series on Asian Olympic heroes, and he had heard about CK Young when he was a kid, and he wondered whatever happened to him. And so he tracked him down. They became friends. He videotaped hours of interviews, and then CK died the following year, and John was left with this collection of material that he wanted to figure out what to do with. And he and I talked a lot about how we could make something special out of this. And then I was living in Los Angeles at the time and got to know Rafer Johnson and CK's widow, Daisy, and spent a lot of time with them talking and so on. So we had this idea for a long time. I think what underpins this whole film in their story is here you have two guys from opposite sides of the world who under normal circumstances would have never even met.
True.
And yet not only did they meet, but they became both athletic rivals in arguably one of the greatest duels in the history of the Olympic Games. But at the same time, were the closest of friends. They trained together. They had the same coach. They used to jokingly call themselves the two-man United Nations. Yes. And, you know, today with big-time sports, it's so ruthless and so many dirty tricks and spoiled by money and so on. Yeah. There's a purity about their friendship that transcended their competition to the point that even during the Decathlon in the 1960 Olympics in Rome, they were giving each other tips about how to do better, even though it would lead to the other one beating the other one.
Yeah.
So it would just really inspired me. So that was one aspect of it. The second part is that Johnson and Young were both among the very first athletes who were political symbols. Yeah. Johnson was an early important figure in the U.S. civil rights movement. Young became a symbol of Taiwan in its struggle with communist China. And those forces shaped their lives, shaped their engagement with the Olympics, and shaped a lot of what happened to them afterwards. And if you fast forward 64 years, and you turn on the news today, what's in the headlines? Taiwan's struggle with China, the struggle for social justice, Black Lives Matter, racial equality in the United States. Yeah. So even though they're both dead and gone, there's meaning in their story. So it was both inspirational and very contemporary, even though it took place a long time ago. So that drove us to put in hours and hours of work over many years to try to find the right format, with the goal ultimately of bringing it out while the Olympics were underway in Paris this year.
Okay, so the plan was to have it done and ready for this Olympics.
The plan was to have it done and ready for the Paris Olympics. That took some doing, and we began this effort in earnest about 5 years ago when we hooked up with a terrific Taiwanese-Canadian director named Frank W. Chen Wei-Yang.
Okay.
He'd done a very interesting documentary about a Taiwanese baseball player named Wang Jianming,
who
was probably known to a lot of your audience, was a big star for the New York Yankees until his career was cut short by injuries. And Frank's documentary about Wang, called Late Life, the Chen-Ming Wang story, it's a terrific piece of work. And when we reached out to him, he immediately got the value of the CK and Rafer story. So we worked with him, but then COVID slowed things down. And it was also a long, hard slog to identify all the archival footage, the old photographs, to find people who knew these guys, who were still around, to do the interviews, and then to put it all together. So it was a tough slog, and I have to admit, the last few months got a few more gray hairs trying to get everything ready to meet the deadline of
I'm
the
sure.
Olympics, but we
Yeah.
did.
So how was it? How were you able to find? I mean, this was the 1960s, right? It was I believe, it was the first televised Olympics. So was there like footage? Like, was it easy to find footage for this?
There's footage of the Olympics,
Uh-huh.
although it's controlled by the International Olympic
Ah.
Committee and not easy to access
Okay.
for a project like this. But we were looking beyond just the events
Sure.
themselves.
Yeah. Of course.
We needed to get material about Rafer and CK. We scoured archives. We went through multiple news agencies. We were very lucky that the Johnson family had in a big cardboard box a collection of old home movies that they hadn't seen in years.
Wow.
Which they gave to us and we digitized,
Oh, wow.
and which had wonderful material, some from the Rome Olympics, but of Rafer and CK together, Rafer and CK training. It had Rafer's wedding where CK was one of the ushers.
Yeah.
But to put all this stuff together and then to figure out how to make it work and then to do all the interviews was very challenging.
I can imagine. You started 5 years. You said about 5 years ago.
We started
Yeah.
in earnest 5 years
Okay.
ago. John Critch and I had been talking about this for 15 years or more.
Okay. Okay.
From not long after his interviews with CK. But to find the right combination of the people who wanted to work with us to do it and to get all the material and pull it all together, we started in 2019. COVID knocked us for a loop for a while, slowed everything down. But then once COVID eased off, we were able to go into high gear.
Okay, beautiful. What were some of like the hardest challenges that you found when you decided, let's do this? I mean, you were saying you had to go through the archives, the family archives. The Johnson family had a lot of stuff. What about sort of maybe the CK side?
We got some photos from CK's family. John Critch was a journalist for many years. He worked for the Asian
Okay.
Wall Street Journal, and I was a correspondent for CNN for almost 25 years. So we both know how to dig.
Okay.
That's what journalists do.
Yeah. Okay.
And we applied these journalistic skills to we went to the National Photo Archives in Taiwan. We went to the National Archives in Taiwan for documentation. We scoured the internet. We came up with all kinds of gems. For example, I was able to find online an audio recording of a retirement dinner for the coach who coached both Rafer and CK, who had the wonderful name of Ducky Drake.
I was going to say Ducky
Drake.
Yes.
Great character.
Uh-huh.
And at this dinner, Rafer and CK were both there, and they
Wow.
all spoke. And
Wow.
when I found this thing, it was like, this is, manna from heaven.
This is
Suddenly
gold.
we've got Ducky's own voice talking about Rafer and CK and the training together and the Olympics. And that was like a treasure.
Yeah.
And, this just over and over and over, we had to sort of dig and dig and dig. And then we had to get permission from different organizations to use their material. So it's like assembling a giant jigsaw puzzle
Okay.
to put all this together, apart from the standard stuff you do in a film, like writing a script and editing and so on. It was getting all the pieces together so we could put them in some sort of order. That was really the greatest challenge.
Okay. And yeah, so were you you came to Taiwan, right? A few years ago, I would say, right?
Yeah.
And this project kind of brought you, was one of the reasons that you came here. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
I lived in Taiwan
Okay.
from 2002 to 2006.
Sure.
And actually, both my kids attended the Taipei American School.
Great
and the older
school.
one is a TAS graduate. And I've been coming to Taiwan. Actually, my first trip here was in 1974.
Wow.
So I've been coming to Taiwan for a long time, and I came many, many times as a journalist for CNN. And then while still working for CNN as a roving regional correspondent, I was based here. But prior to moving this time, I'd been in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I wanted to come here was to work on this film.
Okay.
And because of COVID,
Yeah.
it wasn't possible to sort of make short trips to Taiwan. The country was, the island was effectively sealed off.
Yes.
And so the only way you could come would be to get a work visa. So I was able to arrange to do that. But the primary reason was to be able to be here for this film, because I had to be on the ground to do all of the digging and work with the colleagues of the team we assembled to make it happen.
Yes. I think Taiwan is a really cool place. And one of the things that really struck home for me for the documentary was when you were saying, look, for example, in Taiwan, I'm saying when you're a teacher or a coach, even if you just teach someone once, then you're Lao Shi or you're coach forever, right? But you were saying that none of the younger athletes were greeting the sporting legend or sought his advice, which for me was like, what? This is mind blowing, because he's almost like should be an immortalized person, because what he's done hasn't been done again. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
It's an interesting question. Why is CK Young not given the honor and that I certainly think he's due, and those of us who made the film think he's due? It's hard to say. Partly it was a long time ago. It was a different era.
Okay.
People don't always remember. His career after the 1960 Rome Olympics was kind of up and down. He went to the 1964 Olympic Games, as we talk about in the film, as the overwhelming favorite to win a gold medal in the decathlon. But a teammate who, at the end of those games, defected to China, put something and spiked his drink, essentially drugged him to prevent him from winning a medal. And he went into something of a tailspin then, and kind of struggled to pull himself back. Then he dabbled in politics, and politics here can be poisonous. And it's a long time ago. It's not that he's totally forgotten. There was a memorial service here, and the President Chen Shui-bian attended it when he died in 2007. But the contrast with Rafer Johnson is what's so striking. Rafer was a kind of towering figure in the States. UCLA, where they both trained together, named its track after him. He got great honors from the Olympic movement. He lit the flame at the 1984 LA Games, just as he carried the flag at the 1960 Games, the first African American to do so, something which LeBron James did following in Rafer's footsteps.
That's right.
At the just concluded Olympics. But Taiwan has always had this problematic relationship with the Olympics. What are you going to call it, whether you can compete or not, and so on. So that avenue of honor was ruled out. And so it just kind of fell through the cracks. And I think it was striking to us, talking to his old teammates, friends, and so on. They all just felt badly about it and wished that somewhere there would be a museum to honor him. It was striking to us. We went in April to the National Olympic Training Center in Kaohsiung to do some filming. When he was alive, CK, that was one of his big causes, was more money for training facilities for athletes. And John Critch went to Kaohsiung in 2006, and CK showed him around. It was kind of ramshackle, not all that modern. And they had this little, what CK called Sports Hall of Fame. I had a few statues of CK and some photographs.
Was it the Iron Man house?
No,
that's a different.
This is differently.
Keep going.
This is different. So when we went back this time, we asked if this stuff was still there, and they still have it. But it's in a locked fourth floor room. It's not easy to access to the general public. The statues are kind of gathering dust. There's a few, periodicals and other bits and pieces and so on. But there isn't, a CK Young museum, a CK Young memorial. There isn't a stadium named after him. there is what is known as the Iron Man House.
Yes, sorry.
And this
Go
was
ahead.
given to him by the government after his winning the gold medal winning the silver medal in 1960. And don't forget, in winning the silver medal, what's so amazing about his accomplishment, he was the first athlete from Taiwan to win an Olympic medal. He was the first person with a Chinese surname to ever win an Olympic medal.
I didn't know that part.
And he did it under tremendous political pressure.
Yeah.
Because Chiang Kai-shek was mad at the International Olympic Committee because the IOC had told Taiwan it could not use its official name of the Republic of China in an effort to curry favor with Mao's communists. And Chiang Kai-shek almost ordered a boycott of the Olympics and only chose not to because he thought CK Yang had a chance to win a medal and bring glory to Taiwan. So he competed under tremendous political pressure. And when he came back, as one of the people we interviewed here said, the only person who was more famous in Taiwan back then was Chiang Kai-shek.
Okay.
Everybody knew who CK Yang was. They gave him this house, but it kind of fell into disrepair for a lot of different reasons. And then CK lived in the States for a while, and back and forth, and so on. And so today, nobody lives there. It's kind of fallen apart. It's too bad. It could be refurbished and made into a museum. So people vaguely know who he was, but a kind of clearer knowledge of how important a figure he was as an athlete, as a symbol of Taiwan, and how much this friendship with Rafer Johnson is emblematic of a sort of people-to-people friendship between people from Taiwan and people in the States. I think all of that warrants greater recognition for CK and for Rafer. And our hope is that our film, Decathlon, the CK Yang and Rafer Johnson story, by telling their story, will make some contribution towards achieving that.
I think so. And I think it's a shame that a lot of people don't know. And I didn't know about them, actually. I've been here for 20 years. But when I watched the documentary with my wife, and because CK, I mean, she probably doesn't know, she didn't know the Chinese name, right? But when you brought up some of his teammates, she knew them. She's like, oh, she's from Miaoli. She did this. She's super famous. So it's interesting that, like CK is not more well known. I mean, he's an amazing guy. And I think that when you guys did the footage of him going to the States and him having to deal with the racism, that was crazy. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little about that. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's very interesting about
Sitting in the back of the bus. Yeah.
About this film is a lot of what happens in the film happened in the late 1950s and early 1960s.
Yeah.
And that was a very difficult time in the States. It was the early stages of the civil rights movement. There was still very widespread discrimination towards blacks and people of color more broadly. Rafer was an important early figure in the civil rights movement. He was student body president at UCLA. But Rafer was not a kind of march in the streets activist. His idea of what to do was you make progress by showing what you can do.
Yeah.
So while CK had to face political pressures in relation to the Rome Olympics because Chiang Kai-shek was threatening to order a boycott, Rafer came under pressure from radical civil rights activists urging that he boycott the Rome Games himself to protest racial discrimination in the States. But his counter to that was, I can do more for the cause by going and winning.
Yeah.
And by being named captain of the American team and becoming the first African-American to carry the American flag at the opening ceremony of the Olympics. And that's what he did. But when CK arrived in the States, he had this episode, which he talks about in the film. He went to a track meet in New Orleans in the American South. And he was with another athlete who I don't think was American, was also a person of color. And they got on a bus, and this other guy said, hey, they consider you to be colored person here, and that's the term they used at the time. You have to sit with the black people in the back of the bus.
Yeah.
CK was an extremely, I mean, I almost
looked like a happy-go-lucky guy.
Happy-go-lucky, naive guy.
Yeah.
Utterly unaware of these things. I mean, And you see that in his relationship with Rafer, where the fact that Rafer was African American made absolutely no difference. And CK was welcomed into Rafer's family. We talk about this in the film.
Black Eyed Peas.
They went to his house
Yeah.
and they went to his church. There's a story that's not in the film. It's very funny where CK goes with Rafer's family and they go to the church and the pastor says, "Let's pray for Rafer to win a medal in Rome." So CK looks up and he says, "God, how about thinking about me too?"
Yeah.
But in this episode in New Orleans, he had to sit at the back of the bus along with the black people, and he suddenly realized, gee, I'm a minority too. So he wasn't immune from it. And he was conscious of it, and you know, those were the times through which they lived.
Yeah, that's it's kind of crazy that I mean, that was a long time ago, obviously, but how do you think something like that, when people watch the documentary, would resonate maybe with people today?
Well, thankfully,
Yeah.
in the States,
Yeah.
black people don't have to sit in the back of the bus anymore. But all you have to do is look at the news to see that
Yeah.
the issue of racial equality and social justice
Yeah.
is still a very, very live issue in the States. And that's partly what makes this film contemporary,
Yeah.
and which is important to us, because otherwise it's just two dead guys. You know, stuff happened decades ago. So what?
Yeah.
But the fact is that the forces that shaped Rafer Johnson and C.K. Young, the broad sort of social and political forces, were Taiwan's conflict with mainland China
Yeah.
and the fight for social justice in the United States. And they were affected by it, had to deal with it,
Yeah.
and had to struggle with how to respond to it. And they did so in different ways. And you fast forward 64 years today, and those issues are front and center in the news again. So they
Yeah.
haven't been resolved. So there are things you can take away from Rafer and CK's lives and experiences that are relevant today. And that makes the film of value in a contemporary sense, even though it's about something that happened a long time ago.
And I think that what you were saying about Rafer being very, very positive, he's not going to go into the streets and, you know, march and boycott the Olympics. Him saying that him going and winning would do more than the whole protest, which is incredible. I love that.
Yeah, he did go on some civil rights marches. There's an interesting anecdote that we didn't put in the film. We weren't able to.
Okay.
But a few years after the Olympics, there was a civil rights demonstration in Mississippi.
Okay.
And Rafer was, especially in the early 60s, was a household name in the States.
Okay.
And so he went on this demonstration. He went with Marlon Brando, the famous actor who
of
played
course,
the
I know him.
Godfather, and Frank Sinatra,
Ooh.
the singer, and Sammy Davis Jr.,
Ooh.
who was also a famous singer, who was black.
Yeah.
And they flew,
Rat Pack.
I think they flew in Frank Sinatra's plane.
Ooh.
And they flew to Mississippi, and then there was a car waiting for them. And Sammy Davis Jr. had to get down on the floor of the car as they drove from the airport to the demonstration, because they were afraid if people along the way saw a black person in the car, they'd be attacked.
Wow.
So he was an activist. He took
Okay,
he took
wow.
this stuff seriously. But he was, as I say, he tried to sort of live by example.
Okay.
He was a very pragmatic guy, and it was kind of the quality of his character was his most powerful tool in trying to advance equal rights.
That's wow. I don't even know how to follow that. That's fantastic. I think that the relationship that they had, I mean, is there somewhere, where did that start? Like, was there a first kind of like a track meet somewhere where that started?
Rafer and CK both met for the first time in 1956.
Okay.
At the Olympic Games in Melbourne. Rafer at that point was a big star at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
CK had just become known as the Iron Man of Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an interesting story which we allude to, but we don't tell in
Okay.
full because of time space constraints in the documentary. He went to the 1954 Asian Games in Manila.
Okay.
And the story of how he came to do that is a fascinating one. he had several uncles who were conscripted by the Japanese during World War II and sent off to the Philippines, which the Japanese occupied and never heard of again.
Ooh.
So when he saw that there was going to be the Asian Games held in Manila in 54, he thought, if I get a place on the team, I can go to the Philippines and maybe I can look for my uncles. Kind
Wow.
of naive
Yeah,
thought.
of course.
But anyway,
Wow, though.
so he went to try out, and he was naturally good at everything. And he was so good that in virtually all the events, he beat all the other guys on the team. He ran faster than the runners. He jumped higher than the jumpers. He vaulted higher than the vaulters. And all the other guys on the team were saying, hey, you're going to break our rice bowl. You know, you're stealing our thunder. So the coaches said, okay, you need to do the decathlon because it's all 10 of the big events and you're good at all of them. He'd never done it. He didn't even know about the decathlon, but he trained up and he went. And one of the things in the decathlon is the scoring is not who wins each event, but it's how much you win, and you get points. There's a point system. So if you beat somebody by 2 seconds, you get so many points. If you beat them by 10 seconds. And so in the decathlon, the final event is the 1,500-meter run. And he was like 100 meters behind this Japanese runner. And he thought, well, I'm never going to catch him, but I'll try and speed up a little bit. So he caught up maybe 50 meters. And in doing that, he got enough points to win the gold medal. And he kind of collapsed at the finish line, utterly unaware because he didn't understand the point system, that he'd won the gold medal in the decathlon. And people had to go over and shake him and say, hey, CK, get up. You just won the gold medal.
That's hilarious.
And then he got this Iron Man of Asia nickname. But they met in 56 in Melbourne, where Rafer won a silver medal and CK didn't win a medal at all. And then in 58, the Taiwan authorities sent CK to a track meet in the States, where he almost beat Rafer, and he came in second. And Rafer was very friendly to him. And so this idea came up that maybe CK could go to UCLA, study at UCLA, and train with Rafer. And Rafer was a big-hearted, generous guy. Instead of saying, this guy's a competitor of mine, hold him at arm's length. It was like,
which is what most people would do.
What most athletes would do. It's like, no, welcome, come. And Ducky Drake was a kind of remarkable figure in his own right. He's a sort of traditional all-American white guy. He adopted, one guy was from Taiwan, one guy's the son of a black sharecropper from Texas, treated them like his son. They never, to the end of Ducky's life, they never knew if he had a favorite because he never led on. But he coached them both, and they created this team that together was determined to go to Rome, and they were determined they were going to get number one and number two. They each wanted to be number one, but between the two of them, they were going to get gold and silver. And in the course of that, they got to know each other. They went out to meals together. They double dated. Rafer invited CK to visit his family. And so he really, really embraced him in a way that I think is unusual and moving and inspiring.
I think he was mentioning that CK was mentioning that Rafer was like his idol. He looked up to him, this big, strong man, and he welcomed him in there. And you in the documentary, you mentioned that Ducky kind of told them both how they could win, and he was completely impartial, which I thought was incredible.
This is one of my absolutely favorite stories, and it's recounted in the film Decathlon. It was so close, this competition, that it came down to the last event, the 1,500-meter run, and Ducky was in Rome, and so before the race, Rafer went over to Ducky, and Ducky said, okay, to beat CK, you have to do this and you have to do that. And then CK went over, and Ducky said, okay, to beat Rafer, you have to do this and you have to do that. So as Rafer says in the film, with absolute impartiality, he told each of his proteges how to approach the race so they could beat the other.
That's incredible.
And I find that, and at one point there's a quote from Ducky where he says, People were saying they should both get the gold medal. It's unfair that only one of them can win because
And it was so close.
it was so close. CK won the 1500 meters, but he didn't win it by enough seconds.
Yeah.
So that in terms of points, Rafer just barely squeezed by with the gold.
I think CK won 7 of the 10 events.
CK won
like
7 of
yeah.
the 10 events, but the strength events, which is where Rafer excelled because he was a big
guy.
CK was tall and lanky, but
yeah,
Rafer was built like a professional football player.
Okay.
You know, and so when he threw the discus or the javelin or the shot put, he just went so much further. And that gave him the edge.
Just on the 2 events, he was able to.
On those events, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense because he looks like he was a buff guy.
One of the interesting things about Rafer, he could have easily played pro football.
Okay.
He played basketball at UCLA under John Wooden, who is considered probably one of the greatest college coaches of all time, and he could have probably played professional basketball, but he chose to forego the fame and the riches that would have come with playing in the NFL or the NBA for the purity of the decathlon.
Amazing.
And that again, it's the purity of the competition. You're testing yourself against yourself. That seems to have appealed to both of these guys. And it's another reason why I was so attracted to the story, because they could have both done other things that might have brought them more fame or more money, but this is what they chose to do.
I love that when you were mentioning the Manila track meet that CK went, and he didn't even know all the rules, but he just did his best and beat all the starters and he won. I thought that was one of my more favorite parts of of the documentary, that even though he didn't know the rules, he won.
He was such an immensely talented guy, and I say that's one of the reasons why today he's worth remembering and honoring perhaps more than he is here in Taiwan.
Yeah, I agree. And I like I said, I've been here for a while and I didn't know the story, and I hope
that's
we can
precisely
get some
why we did the film.
That's amazing. I think it's great. I hope that more people can see it. We definitely have it in the description below of this video. Great. Hopefully more and more people will see it. We'll put it everywhere we can.
Great.
I remember you were saying that, we'll just backtrack a little bit, that CK went to the next Olympics, right? And when I was doing the research for this video, it said that he was poisoned. And you were saying that, so you're kind of putting it together that somebody on his team kind of defected. Yes. So this was true. This wasn't a rumor. Okay.
Yes. I mean,
okay.
The evidence is, I guess you would call it circumstantial.
Okay.
There's no smoking gun secret document that we found.
Okay.
But you put together the fact that he had an ailment that he went to, that the doctor, that he said, I feel terrible. And the doctor said, well, you don't have the flu. You don't have this. You don't have that. 2 of his teammates who were with him then said, this guy who defected put something in his drink. And Rafer also told me that that's what CK said. That he, it makes sense because, whether it was the initiative of the defector or whether, that gets into the realm of spy stories and fiction.
Understand.
And so on. But we have people on camera saying we were there and this is what we saw.
Okay. Because when we were doing the research, like I said, my wife knew the girl from Miaoli. My wife is from Miaoli. So she said, oh, this Olympic athlete's from Miaoli. And then when we started talking about CK Young and she found out the Chinese name, then she's like, oh, he was poisoned. That's the first thing she said.
Right.
And I was like, oh, really? Wow.
It's very kind of tragic. I mean,
for sure.
Not only did this happen, but then, and CK then kind of went into a tailspin for a while, and when he pulled himself out of it, he became the coach of the 1976 Taiwan track and field team for the 76 Montreal game.
Yeah, awesome.
And they got to Montreal. And the Canadian government had just established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic. And as a result, said that Taiwan could not compete as the Republic of China. And the government here, on that occasion, said, in that case, we're pulling out. So all three of CK's Olympic experiences were colored in one fashion or another by this ongoing struggle between Taiwan and China. In 1960, it didn't affect him except in terms of adding to the pressure.
Yeah.
And he won his silver medal, but his team entered the Olympic Stadium with this big placard that said "Under Protest," which was, interestingly, if you're interested in historical footnotes,
Yes.
the first overt political protest by a team in the
Okay.
history of the Olympics. So that was 60. 64 was this episode where the teammate who defected to China appears to have slipped something in CK's drink to prevent him from being at full strength to winning a medal. And then in 76, because Canada had just established relations with China, Taiwan again forced out of the games. So his whole, but there's something else that we didn't have time, we couldn't get the video for it, so it's not in the film. But it's an interesting footnote to add. One of the people who's in the film is Qi Zheng, who was the first woman with a Chinese surname to win an Olympic medal. She won a medal in sprinting in the 1968 Mexico City Games. But she was CK's teammate in 1960 and 1964.
64.
And in the early 2000s, I think in 2002, she organized a group of Taiwan athletes to go to the mainland to lend their support to Beijing's bid for the 2008 Olympic Games as a kind of gesture of reconciliation. And don't forget, this was in a sort of somewhat earlier period in which the vibes between Taiwan and China were much less tense than they are now. And CK went along on that. And again, it shows, how big-hearted he was.
Yeah, sure.
That he was hoping to go. He was hoping he'd be invited to the 2008 games, but sadly he died before they happened. But it's interesting that he would go through the trauma that the Taiwan-China struggle created in his own life and come out at the end still feeling we can reconcile. That there are ways, there are steps towards reconciliation that I can take despite everything that happened. I don't have to be bitter about it. So I think it's very interesting.
That's, like you were saying, big-hearted of him to be, let's say, poisoned. Everyone thinks poison, whatever. And then saying, let's go help them get the Olympics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. That's unbelievable. You're saying, quite a few pieces didn't make it into the film. How do you decide, what makes it into the film? I know you're not making a 3-hour documentary, right? So how do you decide that?
It's very painful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's excruciatingly painful to decide what goes in. Partly it depends on what video you have.
Okay.
I mean, it's a visual medium. If you're writing a book, you can write a whole chapter.
Yeah.
But a visual medium needs pictures. So there were, and we struggled with that. And one of the solutions for some of that was that we used animation.
Yeah.
This is a kind of a new trend in documentary filmmaking now. You're seeing a lot more animated documentaries or partially animated documentaries because it gives you a tool to visually express things that you don't have still photos or video for. And good animation can be very emotionally powerful.
Yeah.
So for example, in this film, we used animation a lot. We used it to illustrate important moments in their childhood when nobody was taking pictures of the CK Young as
CK running away from airplanes,
6-year-old kid, or Rafer growing up in the cotton fields in Texas and so on. And we used it to sort of imagine other moments based on real research. We didn't make up things that didn't happen.
Sure.
But we kind of visually imagined what they would to try to evoke that spirit. So John talks about Rafer. He met Rafer and CK together in L.A. And they used to go to this coffee shop on Ventura Boulevard and have these big. They would go jogging together, and then they would have these big breakfasts, and they would joke about the fact that when CK first came to the States, he spoke very little English. So Rafer, I remember Rafer telling me the only thing CK knew how to order was beefsteak.
Oh yeah,
So every time they went out to eat, CK would always order beefsteak.
I love
So
that.
John remembers going to this coffee shop and the two Rafer kidding
Beefsteak.
CK about, oh, you aren't you going to order beefsteak? Because that's so we had the animator create, an image for that.
Yes.
And CK's wife Daisy talked very movingly about his last moments, and we had an animator do that.
Yes.
And we also, because the video of the Olympics themselves, it's old and it's grainy and it's extraordinarily expensive.
Oh, really?
The IOC charges a fortune, and so we used animation to evoke the 10 events.
Okay.
But there was, a lot of discussion back and forth about what do we want animated, what do we not want animated, and how to structure the story. In the end, we came up with the idea of jumping back and forth between telling the story and then event 1, and then telling a little bit more of the story, and then event 2, and then telling more of the story in event 3. So it jumps back and forth. But that's what our team spent hours and hours and hours discussing and arguing and debating and mulling over and trying to figure out what would work to give it the qualities that eventually I think it has.
I think you guys nailed it. It's wonderful. And I really think that the animation brings, some emotion, some extra part. And I also think I love the part about the beefsteak, because when I first came to Taiwan, I couldn't speak Chinese. I came here by myself, and I found like a Japanese sort of a teppanyaki across the street, and the owner was Taiwanese, and all I could say was a sirloin, right? It's a similar thing, because I would go in there and he'd look at me and he'd be like, "Hey, salan." I'm like, "Yes, sirloin." He would say salan and I would say sirloin.
Right.
And to me, it sounded exactly the same when I was 22.
Yeah.
I said, yes. So every day I went there probably for dinner every day for about 6 months, my first 6 months in Taiwan.
Well, when CK got there, his English wasn't very good, but he took a kind of crash English course, and then Rafer took him under his wing.
Yeah.
And, kind of helped get him plugged in. Again, very big-hearted to do with somebody whose main reason for being there is to beat you in the next Olympic game.
That's unbelievable.
Quality, the kind of person Rafer was.
I think that's amazing, because, I would say the average person or the average athlete to say, "Hey, Mike, this is the next best thing. This is the guy who's supposed to dethrone me. Let me help him." That's pretty much unheard of.
You see these wonderful pictures of the, people helping each other at the Olympics and, embracing each other and so on. But to spend several years training with your chief rival and offering him tips
and tricks.
And there's a video clip in the film that we got, that's one of the home movies we got from the Johnson family, and it's CK doing the high jump.
I remember it.
He jumps over it, and then you see Rafer standing on the other side, and he's gesturing, like
telling him, "Hey,
work on your technique here," and stuff like that. So it went both ways, and it's the kind of remarkable partnership.
I think that's amazing, because that was actually, well, there's a lot of favorite parts, but that part where you see, Rafer training CK, it's crazy. It's a great clip, because like I said, mostly, the average athlete probably wouldn't do that. It's crazy. So for you, rewatching it, you probably watched it a million times. Are there any parts in there where you think, this is my favorite part?
It's hard to say. I will admit the final shot I find deeply moving. The illustrator, the animator, did this beautiful shot. True story. That night, after the end of the 1,500 meters, when it was all over and the crowds had left, Rafer and CK walked together along the banks of the Tiber River, the river that runs through the center of Rome.
Okay.
Silently walking, just, two friends. And it's a very powerful moment. There's no picture of it.
Yeah.
But when we talked about it with the animator, he came up with this image, and so it's and of course you can do all sorts of tricks and moves.
Sure.
With, when you edit, so you see the two of them walking, and you see it's moonlight, and it's the Rome skyline and the river.
I know
and
exactly
then
what you're talking
about. The shot goes up to the sky,
Yep.
to the stars, and then you see the two of them almost like constellations. And
Oh.
that
Oh.
is really powerful.
Wow.
And that gets me every time.
Oh, I didn't see that. This constellation part.
That's what it's like. It's the
Wow.
two of them as stars.
Ah.
Watch it again and you'll
Wonderful.
see.
I will. I actually have some pictures here. I'm going to pull them up, and you just tell me what you think. These are some like screenshots sort of things. Anyways, here's the first one. You were talking about the animations,
Uh-huh.
right? And I just thought that was such a cool one. Yeah. Yeah. So that.
All right. That's just our
Yeah.
poster.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great poster, and I love that. I love the slogan "Seeking
Right.
Gold."
Seeking gold, they found brotherhood.
That's
Yeah.
great. I love that. Beautiful. Next one. You were talking about the animations. I wanted to make sure that I brought that up and that I got at least one of them in there. Yeah, a little
Right,
clip
yeah.
of that.
And
Yeah.
again, when you're editing film, you
Sure.
can take a still picture and you can do camera movements,
Sure.
and dissolves and pushes and pulls and so it comes alive.
Yeah, of course.
It's movement, even though it's what you're just showing here is a still.
No, definitely that. Yeah, I think that the animation was fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's go. That was it.
This
That's
is the shot, but this shot in the film, this is
Okay.
the beginning. They're walking along the Tiber
Yes.
River. The decathlon is over. They're just friends again.
Yeah.
But if you watch in the film, the shot goes up, and you don't see them, and you see the sky, and you see them as constellations in the sky.
I didn't see the constellations part, but
Yeah.
I remember that this part was
And it's
Just fantastic.
very proud. And since they both passed away,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a way of saying, they're gone, their spirit is still here.
so good. Yeah, I'll have to rewatch that part for sure. And boom.
This is just Rafer and CK in Rome, and you can just
love it.
see from the
Yeah.
body language and the smiles and so on, how the friendship that was there.
And I love
between
the
two.
Taiwan flag. You're
Right.
able to wear the Taiwan flag. I thought that was really, really cool. We'll blast through another couple here.
Right.
I had to get one of you in there, man.
Yeah. Well, this is me
Yeah.
and Ji Jung, the famous sprinter, and John Critch, who's the other co-creator.
Yep.
And then Frank W. Chen, who's our director.
Okay. She's the Olympic
She-
athlete that
she's-
my wife kind of was like, oh, I know her. Yeah.
She's very well known.
And I believe she's from
And
Yali.
she was very, very helpful to us
Okay.
in the course of doing this. She gave us a lot of support.
Fantastic.
A lot of guidance.
Fantastic. I love that. Couple more. This was so cool. I thought that this one's really cool. Sports
Well, that's
Illustrated.
Rafer and CK and Ducky.
Yeah.
And then in 1963, CK broke the world record, and he
Okay.
was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and the
That's
caption is "World's Greatest Athlete."
Yeah.
And he broke the world record so thoroughly that they had to recalibrate the scoring system for the decathlon as a result of what CK did.
Oh, wow.
Because the old scoring system couldn't accommodate his achievements. So the scoring system since 1963 was based on what CK did.
Wow.
So it's kind of an amazing.
So he
achievement.
smashed it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's beautiful. I got two more. I love their expression on their faces.
But you just see the intensity of the athlete, in competition mode. You also see how strong and powerful Rafer was.
Yeah, man, he's
And
massive.
Yeah.
One more. That's a great
This-
picture. Yes.
This is one of the great sports photographs of all time. At the very end of the decathlon, when the 1500 meters was over, the Rafer essentially and CK collapsed in each other's arms.
Yeah.
And you have this wonderful shot of Rafer putting his head on CK's shoulder. And again, he talks in the film about his emotions at the time. But this is a classic image. I mean, I would put this up in the sort of the top dozen or 20 greatest sports photos ever. I don't know the name of the photographer who took it, but it's emblematic of the intensity of their competition and the intensity of their friendship.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure I ended off with that one because that's such a great picture. And yeah, they were mentioning it in the movie, or sorry, in the documentary. Man, time flies, but I got a few more questions for you. How has the reception to the documentary been so far? I know it's just been released.
So far, we've been very heartened. The reception has been extremely positive, both here in Taiwan and everywhere else that people have seen it.
Okay.
If you look at the comments on the Taiwan Plus YouTube page where it's streaming, they're all positive.
Yes.
I got a note today from an American academic friend in Australia who said that he watched it and it's so moving it brought him to tears.
Okay.
So we've been very, very heartened by how positive the response has been, and the families liked it.
Okay. Beautiful.
And when you're dealing with the lives and legacies of people whose relatives are still around and have every right to complain if you don't get it right.
Sure.
And we were very heartened by their positive response as
Beautiful.
well.
Beautiful. One more question, man. To somebody who hasn't seen it, why should they go watch it now?
Decathlon, the CK Young and Rafer Johnson story is an account of one of the great sporting events of our times.
Yeah.
It's the Olympics have just ended. Everybody knows how intense and how powerful the competition is. The decathlon in Rome in 1960 ranks as one of the greatest Olympic duels of all time.
Yeah.
And it was waged by two men who were considered to be two greatest athletes in the world, intense sporting rivals, but also the closest of friends, and a friendship that endured all kinds of trials and tribulations afterwards, both personal and political, and has, I think, a lot to say to us today about friendship, about sportsmanship, about loyalty, about perseverance, and ultimately about love.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. I love that. I got to feed you, man. It's getting late. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having
me. My pleasure.
Appreciate
like I said, I watched it probably 3 or 4 times. And every time I watch it, I think I learned something new. It's fantastic. For anybody who hasn't watched it yet, in the description below, there will be a link to it. Definitely go check it out. It's on Taiwan Plus. And thank you, man, one more time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for
Thank you.
Take care.
And thank you guys for watching. And we will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you everybody for watching Eddie's show. We feel only happiness, don't feel any sorrow. Welcome everybody to watch more on his content. Eddie Live Podcast. Eddie Live Podcast.